Hello and welcome to another edition of Mailbag. What is Mailbag? Well, Mailbag is a feature of the channel where you guys leave lots of comments on the channel and I attempt to answer those comments, or if I can't answer those comments, I throw it out to you guys who have more knowledge on some of this stuff than I do. So let's get into the first mailbag of this session. Remember, like, comment, subscribe to the channel. Go over to Instagram and follow me there. Go over to Facebook, follow me there. That's where the normal notices are. And consider becoming a Patreon. Next comment or question comes from Podram. And this one was in response to Yamaha CX5, the YRM101 FM composer cartridge I did in June 2023. And Podram writes, the QX1 was also released in 1984 and more than doubled the price of the CX5M. The QX3 was released 3 years later, much cheaper, I think, but both, like all dedicated sequencers then, had no sound module inside. In fact, the CX5M with the YRM101 cartridge is quite an advanced synth and sequencer setup for entering and editing. I used it all the time for making my music and transcribing musical pieces from serious composers. I ran it together with a Korg Poly 800 via a MIDI out. The first module had no MIDI in capabilities except for the clock. That was this was a better sound module, the SFG05 with the MIDI note in. And as far I've not tested if a composer works with MIDI on the CX5M2. Well, the SFG05 is the standard cartridge on the CX5M2. Anyway, what you really need is a keyboard. I have the YK20, which is the full-size keys. Is it full-size keys? It's close enough to full-size keys. Keyboard for the CX5M. There's also the YK10, which is the mini keys version. I've got both of them actually. I've acquired both of them over a period of time through various job lot type purchases. And there's also a YK01, which has got smaller keys, but they all connect via this proprietary connector, which is a bit of a pain in the bum because it means you can't use those MIDI keyboards in essence on anything else. Anyway, once you get accustomed to the workflow, it's really easy and versatile for making music. The most limiting factors are the cassette interface for saving and loading, the need to reset the switch between sound editor and composer, or need to use the reset switch, I think he means. You could have circumvented this by using two CX5Ms. Obviously, that was not a cheap option. The newer FM music composer, the YRM501, can save and load from and to MSX disk, as the YM502 is integrated in the CX5M128. There's also no real-time recording option in the composer. Well, was that a bad thing? Possibly. But it was one thing where I think the Amiga took its leap on this sort of stuff a few years later. On the Blue MSX there is a very faithful emulation of the CX5M and the sound modules SFG01 and SFG02. Why do people make these things that you can't pronounce properly? I'm doing something at work at the moment which is very similar, and I'll tell you what, after saying an acronym about half a dozen times, your tongue gets completely tired, and I've been in meetings all week that that's the case. Anyway, plus the fact that the Blue MSX has most of the cartridges. Well, now, as I said earlier on, I've got a YK20 for the MX CR5. It does need a bit of a clean and a bit of a restoration on it. That's possibly a project I'll do as we move into spring. And I did really like the reply. It was really interesting just to understand you know, how other people use the CX5M. The CX5M was quite ahead of its time, in my opinion, for a 1984 machine. Yes, the Amigas came along. Yes, the Atari's STs came along and started to take over. But in 1984, you know, you kind of had your Commodore 64s. You kind of have your Apple, your early Apples. You had your Sinclair Spectrums in the UK. And a number of other brands. Dragon 32 is one that springs to mind, which a friend of mine had, which had no software for it whatsoever. But you didn't really have anything that was really in the software space. A lot of people used the BBC Micro. So in the UK we had something called a BBC Micro. And that kind of got quite a lot of traction because it was very versatile in terms of how you could program it. So anyway, Podron writes back and says, gladly I was able to acquire a CX5M2 with the FM voicing module 2 in slot in the bottom and the front. It was a bit expensive for such an old machine, and I should have bought it for a shoestring 10 years ago, but it was really worth it. Now we'll try and find the YM501 Music Composer 2 cartridge and maybe connect an MSX floppy drive. Now what he has pointed out here is, like all this legacy equipment, prices are going up because people start to realise what it is that they actually own. You know, it's not like what was happening. You know, people used to buy electronica and almost give it away. You know, this is the whole sort of, you know, people buying things from thrift stores and what have you. But now people realise that there is actually some intrinsic value in some of this stuff, especially if you want sort of lo-fi, LA synthesis, PCM style sounds from a specific era in time to try and match in with the sort of music of your favourite bands, especially if you're in a cover band. You know, this is an easy way of effectively getting the sounds right, if you like. So yeah, I mean, you know, people have started acquiring. There's a big 8-bit community. If you go on YouTube, you'll find many channels that do things about 8-bit computers. It's not what this channel's about. This channel is obviously about making music with your 8-bit machine rather than actually what an 8-bit machine's all about. And the other thing is, I've actually acquired, and funny enough, it is actually here. And I don't know why I've got it here, because it should be down in storage. It's the JVC. Yeah, so there is my MSX disk drive, but it should be down in storage. I don't know why it's up here at the moment. It's probably going to go down to storage because we're having a lot of renovations work. But there is my floppy disk drive for my MSX. So there are more videos on the MSX to follow. Honestly, I just think it's like all these things. You know, it's getting around to time to spend quality time with some of this stuff and see what it can do. But there may be opportunities in the next month.